All right, let's talk about a major new piece of legislation that's making waves in Canada. It's called Bill C-2, but you'll also hear it called by its official name, the Strong Borders Act. And right off the bat, this bill gets to the heart of a really tough question, one that countries everywhere are wrestling with. How do you balance the need for national security with the right to individual privacy? That's really the core tension we're going to unpack today.
Okay, so let's get into it. First things first, what exactly is this new border bill?
Well, the first thing you need to know is that this is what's called an omnibus bill, and that's a key term. It basically means it's not just one small change. Think of it more like a giant package deal that rolls a whole bunch of changes to many different laws all into one single bill. So its impact is, well, it's incredibly broad. And when I say broad, I mean really broad. Just look at this list. We're talking about changes that affect customs, immigration, and refugee policy, privacy law, even Canada Post and how it handles our mail. On top of that, it digs into drug enforcement and rules against money laundering. It really touches on so many different parts of Canadian law. So with a bill that's this big and complex, the devil is always in the details, right? So let's peel back the layers a bit and look at what's actually changing. We'll focus on some of the most significant proposals. Okay, let's break down 3 of the biggest proposed changes. First, for Canada Post, the bill would give them the power to open letters, not just bigger packages, if they suspect something illegal is inside. Then there's immigration. The minister would get the power to withdraw a refugee claim if the person isn't physically in Canada, and the stated goal there is to make the system more efficient. And finally, and this one is huge, it would give law enforcement much broader access to what's called our subscriber information. Let's just zoom in on that first one for a second, because, the idea of Canada Post opening letters, that's definitely something that catches your eye. So how would that actually work? Well, the process sounds pretty simple, but the change is huge. Basically, once a piece of mail is sent, if a customs officer has a suspicion that it contains something dangerous or illegal, this bill would give them the authority to open it. And the big shift is that this now includes letters, which have historically had a much higher level of privacy protection. Okay, now let's pivot to that other really big one, the change that could fundamentally alter digital privacy in Canada. What's the deal with law enforcement getting access to more of our data? This right here is a really critical change. In the past, subscriber information basically just meant your name and address, simple contact info. The proposed new definition? It's a massive expansion. We're talking name, address, metadata, information about your devices, what kind of services you use, and more. It's a huge increase in the data that law enforcement could ask for, and this is the really key part, in some situations, they might be able to get it without a warrant. And all of this brings us right back to that fundamental conflict we talked about at the start. As you can imagine, a bill this far-reaching has kicked up a very serious debate, and there are 2 very clear sides. On one side, you have supporters, including the government, who argue that these new powers are absolutely crucial for the 21st century. They say these are the tools needed to stop the flow of dangerous drugs, to fight organized crime, and to really protect the integrity of our borders. For them, it's all about giving law enforcement what they need to keep Canadians safe. But on the other side of the coin, you have the critics, and they see this very, very differently. Privacy advocates, civil liberties groups, legal experts, they're really sounding the alarm. Their argument is that this bill could lead to a dangerous expansion of state surveillance, but without the proper checks and balances, like court oversight, to protect our fundamental rights and freedoms. And their concerns get really specific. There's a real worry that this could violate parts of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, particularly those that protect us from unreasonable search and seizure. Critics also argue that the changes to the refugee system put an unfair and undue burden on already vulnerable people. The lack of requirement for a judge's approval for some of these data requests is a huge red flag for them. And they also point to the potential costs for businesses that will have to comply with all these new rules. So let's just pull back for a second and try to look at the bigger picture. What are the wider, maybe longer-term implications of a bill like this actually becoming law? One of the biggest long-term concerns is all about data. Critics argue this bill could pave the way for easier sharing of Canadians' data with foreign governments, like the United States. This could mean that American authorities, for instance, might have an easier path to getting data that's held by tech companies here in Canada. And on the immigration front, the changes are pretty profound. By allowing a refugee claim to be automatically withdrawn if the person isn't physically in Canada, critics say it creates a massive hurdle.
You could have a situation where someone who fled persecution but was delayed on their journey could have their case thrown out before a judge ever even gets to hear it.
So, with such high stakes and so much debate, where does this bill even go from here? Let's take a quick look at what happens next. Here's the basic roadmap for any bill. It was introduced back in June, and right now it's at what's called the second reading stage, but it's still got a long way to go. After this, it has to go to a committee for a really detailed study, and then it has to get approval from the Senate. So what that means is the final version of this bill is still very much up in the air.
So as this whole process moves forward, here are the key things to keep an eye on. That final legal definition of subscriber information is going to be absolutely massive. The rules around sharing our data with other countries, critical. And of course, what kind of checks and balances, like needing a judge's sign-off, get put on these new powers will be so important, along with how these new refugee rules are actually applied in the real world.
And that brings us right back to where we started. This bill really forces a tough national conversation about trade-offs. It's about balancing that deep desire for security with the need to protect privacy and fundamental rights. So the final question really is for you to think about. When it comes to securing our borders, where do you draw the line?